Have you ever felt a sort of uneasiness come over you that you couldn't really explain? An uneasiness that makes you feel really uncomfortable, or an uneasiness that makes you feel really disgusted? A feeling that really struck a nerve and made you stop and think. Last month, when I was driving back to school from Chicago, I read this tweet. I wonder if the realization that children are starving to death in the world daily would help people keep their attitudes in check when it comes to the first world drama that we think is important. We need to get over ourselves. Hashtag Yemen famine, hashtag Yemen crisis. Truthfully, at first I really quickly scanned the 140-character tweet and almost scrolled past it, but it was something about the words, "we need to get over ourselves," that really stopped and made me look. I clicked one of the hashtags and started scrolling through the other tweets that were really similar. Terrifying and heartbreaking. The world needs to pay attention. Hashtag Yemen crisis. This isn't getting enough news coverage. Please retweet if you get this. Hashtag Yemen. Hashtag can't wait. Hashtag Yemen crisis. Hashtag Yemen genocide. There were hundreds of tweets like this, but I still wasn't exactly sure what they were about. I clicked on a link from one of the tweets that brought me to an Al Jazeera article further explaining the famine crisis in Yemen. I read through the article, and immediately after finishing it, I dropped my phone into my lap and just stared blankly in front of me. I felt so sad. It was a weird kind of sadness because I also felt so angry. I felt so sad for the people of Yemen and the hardships that they've had to endure, but I also felt so mad at myself that I had not been aware of any of this and anything that was going on in the world that we share. How is it that I was so ignorant that I had never heard about the famine before that moment? How is it that I was so engulfed in my own worries and responsibilities that I hadn't even begun to think what was going on in the world that day? How did I not notice that thousands of lives had already been taken by this famine crisis? And what else did I not know about the Yemen crisis? Later that day, when I got home, I did some research, and here's what I found. 1. Yemen has been vulnerable for years. Even before the current conflict, around half of the population lived below the poverty line, and the country has faced chronic instability, weak governance, underdevelopment, underemployment, and hunger. In late 2014, an armed group called the Houthi rebels moved into the capital city and took over the government institutions. Shortly after, a coalition of dozen states, led by Saudi Arabia, launched a military campaign to take back the Houthi-led areas and restore power to the government. The conflict has only heightened since then, leading to widespread destruction, displacement, and hunger for millions of innocent civilians. 2. The situation is dire. Yemen imports 70% of its fuel, 90% of its food supply, and 100% of its medical supplies. But because of the conflict, all of Yemen's seaports have been closed, and all of their goods cannot come in. 3. Yemen has one of the highest malnutrition rates in the world. 1.7 million children suffer from moderate acute malnutrition. 462,000 children suffer from severe acute malnutrition. And a child under 5 dies in Yemen every 10 minutes from preventable causes. 4. According to the Famine Early Warning System Network, Yemen is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. The ongoing famine in Yemen affects 17 million people today, roughly 70% of its population. And 5, every single contribution helps provide more food, water, shelter, and support to the families and the people in the crisis living in Yemen. There are many organizations like UNICEF USA or International Rescue Committee that are making and doing their biggest efforts to help. After learning about the Yemen crisis, I was still really confused how I'd never heard about it before. I was probably the only one who hadn't been aware of what was going on, right? Wrong. After talking to some friends, I realized that I wasn't the only one who was lacking the knowledge about the Yemen crisis. But even though I wasn't alone, it almost felt worse that hardly anyone around me knew too. I realized that I had been so busy with my own responsibilities that I forgot to see what was happening around with the rest of the world. I know this happens to everyone, and it's nothing to really be ashamed of, but understanding the world around us is really important. And even though the crisis in Yemen is a specific issue that really affected me, there are monstrosities all around us that I and others should be more informed about.